Our third panelist is Dr. George Banano, Professor of Education and Psychology at Columbia University's Teachers College in the Department of Counseling and Clinical Psychology. His particular research interests include the ways that people respond to grief and trauma. His work on defining the psychological resilience in adults exposed to adversity has been funded by the NIH and the National Science Foundation, and the results have been published in Psychological Science. Welcome, George.
Thank you. I have some fairly simple things to say, and I probably don't have too much to say, although it will probably appear complex, which is, I think, how I get away with getting paid for it. I consider myself an objective scientist. I'm a psychological researcher. I'm trained as a clinician. I no longer work as a clinician. And I think it's very important to make objective researchers cry once in a while. It keeps us on our toes. And in fact, that is really what these tapes, I think the short film that Jim has produced thus far and the body of tape, the body of material are really important in that they're so real. And I think that's how I've been using them, primarily with my students at this point. What I do is study really all the bad things that happen to people. I studied death of loved ones, war, physical and sexual abuse, biological epidemic. We studied the SARS epidemic, traumatic injury, and of course we did a lot of research in New York after 9/11, both among people who were in the towers after 9/11. We did a lot of filming, very much like the filming you see in the short here and in the clips that in the clip that Kathy Shear played. We don't have music. We don't do it in such a polished way. And we do it very differently in that because we try to be as objective as we can. And it's a different kind of film. And I think that for me it's been very interesting to see this footage because it tells a different story. There are different ways to look at how people cope with loss and trauma. And my work is, to some extent, challenged a lot of the traditional ideas about how we cope. And I normally, when I present this work, I hit people over the head with endless slides of the data because I have to convince people. I won't do that, but I will not let you, I will not miss an opportunity to show at least a few slides. I always have a few with me. So I did bring a few. And if I can, oh, yeah, okay. So this is one of the traditional ways we've looked at how people cope with these kinds of events. You notice I have the phrase in the lower left-hand corner, potentially traumatic event, because events are not traumatic, they're potentially traumatic, and there's a tremendous variability in how people react to events. This is the average impact of an event, of a hypothetical traumatic event. And on the bottom here you have time, and on the y-axis you have the vertical axis you have emotional disruption. And this, if we average across people, we tend to get something like this. It's actually can be very misleading because it assumes that this is, I have the words typical response, it assumes that it is the normal response, and it's actually not. So this here now puts psychopathology and complicated grief, the kind of very important things that Kathy Shear talked about, and if this were a more direct traumatic event, we would have post-traumatic stress disorder. And there are always some people who cannot get over events that have befallen them, and they look like that top line. And the field of psychiatry, psychology, social work have focused on that top line because, for obvious reasons, because those are people who need help, and we need to, as a society, we need to take care of those people. But it's very important, and at least it's been my take on this world, and I think the footage that we see does also embody that these are not the only responses. So if I can have the next slide. So in a way, my work is a lot like the way Jim began this film, in that I typically recruit anybody that will come in and talk with us when we do our research. So after 9/11, we went to Bosnia after the Civil War in the Balkans. We've done lots of different kind of work. We went to Hong Kong after SARS, and we get all kinds of people to come in, and we try to get some sense of what the full range of functioning and what the diversity of responses are. So the next slide is what we find. And again, if this were a more like a 50-minute scholarly presentation, I'd show you endless slides like this. And this is really just a condensation of most of what we know. And I'm fairly confident in saying that this is real. This is what we see endlessly across many different kinds of events. And I'm fascinated by this bottom half down, this bottom portion down here, and this yellow line which says resilience, because we often find between 1/3 and 2/3 of the people exposed to any event cope remarkably well. And when I say cope remarkably well, I mean they're basically able to continue functioning and doing what they need to do. Now, this is where I think this footage becomes very important. We, as I said, we do this in our own research. We film people. We talk to people. We film them over time. And we see the variability. But it's ever so important to see many different versions of it, because it really does remind you of what this is about. It's very easy for this to become abstract. And, you know, science is abstract and objective. And I find this a kind of a schizophrenic life, because I go home and then my children tell me I'm a noodlehead, right? And so, you know, there's that other part. And I think that's where the science must be objective, and it must be, in a sense, I wanted to say cold, and I stopped myself because it's not cold, but really clear-headed. But the ideas and the understanding come from the rest of us. They come from inside us. And that's why I said it's important to cry once in a while. And when we interview people, we sometimes cry. And also we learned we can laugh, too, when we interview people. I didn't mean laugh at them, but laugh with them. And people make jokes, and people make jokes constantly. So for me, the footage is a great resource, and that's how I've been using it in my classes, to show people footage of what various experiences people have had. Now, when people have post-traumatic stress disorder, now the cell phone maybe, right? When people have post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated grief, they don't look like maniacs. You know, I mean, there's kind of an assumption that that's what we see, and you see it in the footage. They're just people trying to understand what happened and trying to get by. And it's very important for us to continually see that. By the same token, the people at the bottom, the people who are resilient, they're not simply just shrugging it off and walking away. They have all kinds of things going on, and thoughts and issues and mysteries to confront. I love the footage of Nick. You see it very often. People talk about these seemingly magical things that happen. And you have to make sense of that. You have to put it somewhere. And so it's very important to see that people are not just that line. As I said, though, and I would bet almost anything on it, that this picture of how people react is real. It's what we've gotten through lots of very sophisticated studies and studies other people have done. We've done all kinds of brain-crunching statistical techniques to derive these trajectories. So it is real, but it's only one piece of the story. So for me, that's where this footage really comes to be very important. And it's marvelous footage. And in my class, I teach a class called the Psychology of Loss and Trauma with about 120 master's level students. I have in the past asked them to go out and find someone who suffered a loss and trauma and interview them and write about it. And to really ask, is the science really doing what we need it to do, or is there something missing, or is the science perfect? You know, and that's the question they have. It's fraught with peril to send 120 students out to interview people, and I worry about the end of my career every semester when I do it. Somebody's going to do something unethical, and I'm going to be sunk. It hasn't happened yet. The footage, though, it gives us a great opportunity, and we've used it in my class this year. We showed Nick and Ling. And Nick was the young man who lost his mother, and then Ling was the Asian woman who was burned. And the requirement was they have to watch it all. And I didn't do any cutting and pasting, and I simply asked them to write about it. And because it's the same story for everybody, it allows me a chance to see. And there are all kinds of interesting things. We've had some discussions earlier as we were waiting at the beginning of the evening about what this kind of footage tells us and what the questions are. But for now, that's really where we're at with it. It is just the beginning of what we're going to do with it. And I do a lot of facial analysis and coding, and we'll probably be doing those kind of things in the future and using the clips that way. So I think it's just the beginning of what we can do with it.